Hey guys, welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where the past doesn't shout, it whispers. Tonight, we're not curled up in a modern clinic, waiting for our name to be called under soft fluorescent lights. We're not reaching for cough syrup or scrolling through WebMD. No. We're stepping barefoot into the wet, humming darkness of the 9th century Maya jungle. And here, if the rains came too early or a cough lingered too long, you could simply fade away. Not the stone temples or golden masks you've seen in museums, but the kind of place where medicine was brewed from tree sap, honey-toad venom, and maybe a little prayer. The kind where healing meant more than chemistry. It meant dreams, spirit winds, ancestral memory. You might imagine the Maya as peaceful astronomers tracking stars from atop pyramids. But tonight, we're far from the observatory. We're deep in a village hut, beneath a dripping thatch roof, where someone is burning copal resin beside a fevered child. And if the healer doesn't arrive before sunrise, the jungle might take one more soul back. And trust me, by the end of this strange, soft journey, you'll never look at honey the same way again, or frogs, or rainstorms. Maybe even your next fever will feel different. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop a little hi in the comments if you're awake enough. And if you enjoy these sleepy sideways looks at History Hit, like or even subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now, let's settle in. Dim the lights. Let the room go quiet. Pull the blanket a little tighter around you. Can you hear the rain, the way it starts as a tap on leaves, then becomes a rhythm on the roof? That's how it begins. Always, the rainy season. And with it, the coughs, the chills, the dreams. You're not warm. You're not dry. You're not safe in your own bed. You're lying on a woven mat skin, damp from the jungle air, wrapped in a blanket that smells of beeswax and smoke. Outside, something croaks low and throaty. A toad, they say, whose venom heals, or hallucinates. And the child next to you, his breath is shallow. His skin is burning. You've sent for the healer, but the healer never rushes. The healer listens first to dreams, to birds, to signs. You're not in control here. You're in the rainy season of ancient Mesoamerica, where survival depends not on hospitals, but on plants that grow in moonlight, on chants whispered into the ears of spirits, on whether the gods feel merciful tonight. Let's begin. Section 1. When the rains begin. You hear it first before you feel it. A low pattering, like fingers tapping gently on stretched hide, then a pause, then another. You lie still on a woven mat, the fibers pressing gently into your back, the air thick with the scent of damp, thatch-burned wood and the sweet sourness of old fruit. The sound builds not a storm, not yet just the beginning. The kind of rain that suggests more is coming, that the jungle is waking up from its dry silence. Outside, the trees lean forward slightly. Their leaves tremble like they know what's about to fall. And somewhere close by, a toad croaks once, long and deep, like a warning. This is how the rainy season begins. You shift under the cotton blanket. It's thin but clings to your skin like it's alive. Beneath you, the mat smells faintly of smoke and sweat, not unpleasant, just real. You've lived in this hut your whole life, and you know what comes next. The air will thicken, the coughing will start, the fevers will come, and so will the healer. But not yet, for now it is only rain and waiting. You sit up slowly. The room is dim, lit only by a clay oil lamp that flickers near the wall. Its glow throws soft shadows onto the earthen floor where tiny beetles scurry in and out of cracks like nervous thoughts. In the corner, your younger cousin, no older than 8, stirs beneath a second blanket. His breath whistles through cracked lips. He's too hot even in this chill. You reach for a gourd of water and place it beside him, your fingers brushing his skin. It's burning, and there it is, again the sound of the rain growing heavier. This is no passing shower. It's the first real rain, the kind that will soak the ground until it turns to mud, flood the footpaths between homes, and awaken things that have been asleep too long. You glance toward the roof. It's holding for now, but the leak above the central post always finds its way through. You don't speak. There's no one to speak to, not at this hour. Your aunt and uncle are at the shrine. Your mother is asleep in the next hut. This is your watch. And still the rain falls. It taps on the leaves, drums on the thatch, slides down the bark of the ceiba tree just outside. You remember what your grandmother said, when the rain begins, the air listens. So don't speak anything you don't want the gods to hear. You swallow your worry. The fever came yesterday, quick and without reason. 1 hour the boy was playing with dried corn husks. The next he was curled into himself, mumbling strange words and sweating through his tunic. No cuts, no swelling. Just heat, and that vacant look in the eyes. That's the worst part, that blankness. Like part of him has gone somewhere and left the rest behind to struggle with breath and bone. You've seen it before. Sometimes they return, sometimes they don't. You reach for the pouch tucked into the wall's reed slats. Inside, a scrap of cotton soaked in honey and rolled with crushed bark. You unwrap it gently. The scent is faint, floral smoky. You place it near his face. Maybe it will help him sleep easier, maybe not. The healer will know what to do. If she comes, they say she lives 3 hills away in a clearing where snakes nest in tree roots and the wind moves like it remembers old names. She doesn't come for every fever, only the ones that speak to her. You wonder if she's already dreamed of this boy, if she saw his face in the smoke or in the pattern of broken shells near the river, because that's how she chooses. Not by logic, not by urgency, but by feeling. It's strange, but you don't question it. No one does. She's saved people who were nearly gone, and let others go without ever touching them. The boy whimpers, just once. You reach out, wiping his forehead with the back of your hand. His skin is so hot it almost burns. You close your eyes. And for a moment, you remember the story your grandfather used to tell. How in the first rainy season, the gods tried to drown the sickness in the soil, but the illness learned to float. So now every year the spirits try again. And the toads are the ones who whisper the cure. You smile softly at the memory. It doesn't make sense. But then again, neither does fever. Neither does healing. Outside, the rain deepens. A steady rhythm now. No more pauses. The earth is drinking. And somewhere far away, perhaps the healer has opened her eyes. She knows. She always knows. Section 2. Fever in the forest. The rain didn't stop. Not after an hour. Not after 3. It turned the footpaths into winding rivers and the air into a heavy blanket that clung to your skin, thick with the smell of soaked wood and soft decay. You didn't sleep. You sat beside the boy, listening to the way his breath came in short bursts. Sometimes he whispered, words you didn't recognize. Sometimes he just lay still. And once, just once, you thought you saw him smile at something behind your shoulder. You didn't turn around. By first light, the clouds had not lifted, but the color of the world had changed. The soft blue of pre-dawn slipped through the cracks in the wall. You stepped outside, careful not to wake him. The village was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you aware of every drop sliding down your arms, every stick snapping beneath your heel. You walked past the cooking pits now, puddles past the grinding stones, left under makeshift palm roofs. No fire yet, no sound of maize on stone, just the drip, drip, drip from the trees. And in that silence, you reached the central shrine. Your mother stood there already. She was placing 3 cacao beans and a carved shell onto the altar stone. She didn't look up when you approached, but her voice was steady. "He's worse." You nodded. She closed her eyes, a long moment. Then, take the path behind the field. Follow the roots. You'll find her if you're meant to. No one ever told you to ask for the healer, only to find her, if the path opened. And so you went. You took a dried gourd filled with water, a small pouch of roasted maize, and wrapped yourself in a cotton shawl. Then you slipped out past the edge of the field into the arms of the forest. The trees welcomed you like they remembered your name. The ground was soft moss and mud-broken leaves, ancient footprints, swallowed long ago. You walked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time doesn't move the same under a jungle canopy, not when everything smells like green, and rain, and old stone. You passed a fallen ceiba roots like fingers reaching for the sky. You passed a broken statue half covered in vines, a face with eyes that no longer looked forward. And then there was the clearing. You didn't see it until you were in it. Suddenly the trees stepped back. The light returned, pale, diffused, and there she was. Not dressed like a priestess, not in gold or feathers, just a long tunic, a belt of woven cord, hands stained with something dark, and eyes that looked not at you but through you. She was squatting near a shallow bowl, grinding something. You couldn't tell what. You didn't speak. You only waited. After a while she stood. Still no words. She walked past you, toward a tree with hanging vines. Tied to the bark was a bundle cloth feathers, small bones. She untied it, held it to her lips, whispered something you didn't understand. Then finally, her eyes met yours. His spirit is outside his body, she said, like it was a weather report. He's not lost yet, but he's listening to another voice. You didn't know what to say, so you nodded. She looked up at the sky. Rain still fell lighter now. But steady. The path back will be slower, she said. I will come, but I must find the toad first. She said it like it made sense, and maybe it did. She turned back to the hut and picked up a woven bag, slipped in a small clay jar, a dried root, a strip of beeswax. Then she walked toward you, past you, into the trees. You followed in silence. She moved with purpose, as if she could smell the illness from miles away, or perhaps she'd already been to your hut in a dream. The way opened before her vines, parting puddles, finding other places to sit. The birds watched, but didn't sing. Even the frogs grew quiet. After a while, she spoke again. We'll need the venom. You didn't ask why. You only held your breath. Section 3. The healer arrives. She didn't knock. There were no greetings, no words of comfort or concern, just the low rustle of her feet on the threshold and the sudden stillness of the room when she entered. The air inside the hut was thicker than outside, warm, wet, and tense with the weight of breath smoke and silence. The boy had not moved. His cheeks were flushed dark, and his lips had taken on a faint, purple hue. The healer stood just inside the doorway, her silhouette framed by the gray light of the rain beyond. She didn't speak. Instead, she looked at him for a long, long moment, not like a doctor assessing symptoms, but like a hunter watching something move just beneath the surface of the water. You sat back near the wall, hands resting in your lap. There was nothing to do now, only to witness. She stepped forward. From her woven satchel, she pulled a few items, a stone bowl, a small roll of beeswax, a tight pouch sealed with a knot and smeared in ash. She opened the pouch. Inside, the dried skin of a toad. Its smell hit the air like a forgotten corner of the jungle, sharp, musky, a little sweet, a little dangerous, the kind of scent that made your nose twitch and your mind wander places you didn't want it to. She placed the skin on the flat stone, then leaned over the boy. Her fingers didn't touch him. They hovered close enough to feel his heat far enough not to disturb whatever realm he now floated in. Then she whispered something, not to him, to something else. You didn't understand the words. They weren't from your tongue. She spoke slowly, in a rhythm that matched the rain, as if she were calling something out or inviting something in. And then she pulled the second item from her bag, a black stone polished smooth. She placed it on the boy's chest. It stayed there, balanced perfectly, as if held in place by more than gravity. Next, the beeswax. She bit off a small piece, chewed it, warmed it in her palm, then pressed it to the center of the boy's forehead. It glistened faintly, catching the dim lamplight. Then came the sound. Not from her mouth, but from the back of her throat. A low, vibrating hum. Not quite singing, not quite growling. It was ancient, familiar, and foreign at once. Like something remembered from a fever dream you had long ago and thought you'd forgotten. The boy flinched. Not much, just a twitch of the fingers. But it was the first movement in hours. She didn't stop humming. She placed her hand just one lightly on his chest above the stone. The humming deepened. And then he exhaled, a long, rattling breath that made your skin crawl and your heart ache. It sounded like wind through a narrow cave. She leaned close to his face and whispered again, this time in your language, but the words made little sense. Follow the smoke, not the voice. She turned to you, suddenly eyes sharp alert. He's between places, she said. His body wants rest. But something else is calling. Something that smells like sweetness. You swallowed hard. She reached for her pouch again, this time pulling out a tiny jar sealed with red thread. Inside, thick, dark honey. She dipped one finger into it, then drew a slow line from the boy's chin to his throat. Let the sweetness remind him where to stay, she murmured. Outside, the rain slowed, not stopped, just softened. As if the jungle too were listening, the boy stirred again. His fingers twitched. A sigh escaped his lips. His eyes flickered, but did not open. The healer stepped back, and then she sat, cross-legged on the floor, still, silent. Waiting, and you understood this was not medicine, not in the way you had thought. This was negotiation, and it was only just beginning. Section 4. Venom of the Toad. The rain picked up again. A soft tapping at first, then a firmer drumming. It filled the spaces between breaths, between thoughts. The boy lay still, but his color had changed, less purple, now more like heat ripening beneath the skin. The healer reached for her pouch once more. This time she was slower, more deliberate. Like what she was about to do required permission, not from you, but from the forest itself. She pulled out a second toad skin, not dried, not preserved. Fresh. The skin was mottled, deep green, soft brown, with specks of gold where light touched moisture. Its surface shimmered slightly, coated in a thin, sticky film. You didn't have to be told this was the venom. She held it like something sacred, and it was. The Maya had long known the secrets of the Bufo alvarius, the Colorado River toad. Though it lived farther north, its cousin Bufo marinus thrived in the lowland jungles. Its venom wasn't just poison. It was a passage. Applied the wrong way, it burned, paralyzed, or killed. But in the right hands, in her hands, it could open a door. The healer pressed the skin against a small stone, gently squeezing it. Droplets oozed out, milky, almost glowing in the flickering lamplight. She used the edge of a carved bone to scrape the fluid into a tiny clay bowl. Then came the ritual. She added crushed flower petals, yellow, from the jungle vine that only bloomed during storms. A sliver of dried bark. A single black ant still moving. She stirred it all together with a reed, then placed the bowl near the fire, just close enough to warm, not boil. The smell that rose was strange, earthy, sharp. It made your throat tighten and your eyes water. The boy's breath quickened. The healer knelt beside him. She dipped her fingers into the mixture, then gently rubbed a thin line along his temples, behind his ears, and across the center of his chest, just above the heart. Then she sat back and waited. You watched, and slowly something shifted. His fingers curled, his jaw twitched. Then a sound, low, soft, almost like laughter, except it wasn't his voice. It came from somewhere else, a layer beneath. The healer nodded to herself. She wasn't alarmed. This was the sign she'd waited for. She reached into her satchel once more and pulled out a thin strip of fabric smeared with dark ink glyphs written in a language older than the village, older than the empire. She wrapped it loosely around his forehead, tying it with a single knot. "To keep him here," she murmured. And then the boy spoke, not in his own tongue, not in words you recognized, but in a language made of breath and syllables that didn't quite connect, like the chanting of old men in temples, or the murmur of rivers against stones. The healer answered him, softly, reassuringly, like coaxing a bird back into its nest. You looked on helpless, but mesmerized. The venom wasn't making him sicker. It was pulling him toward something, and maybe if the gods allowed it would pull him back. This was how healing worked here. Not with scalpel and suture, not with pills and diagnoses, but with risk, with faith, with careful balance between terror and trust. Outside, the toads had begun their chorus, deep, throaty calls echoing through puddles and leaves. A sound that belonged to the rain, to the dark, to the things that came before names. And inside this small hut beneath a roof that still leaked at the edges, you watched as a child danced with the edge of death. Guided not by logic, but by venom, by incense, by a woman who spoke to spirits as easily as she breathed. And you knew, without doubt, if he returned to you, he would return changed. Section 5. Dreams and Diagnosis. Before she touched the boy again, the healer closed her eyes. The rain had softened to a hush, barely there now, like the jungle itself was holding its breath. She sat beside the fire, her legs folded beneath her hands, resting on her knees, and she breathed. Slowly, evenly. You didn't speak, didn't move. You'd seen her like this before, years ago, when your brother had stepped on a stingray spine. She hadn't asked where it hurt. She hadn't even looked at the wound right away. She had only closed her eyes and waited for the answer to come from somewhere else. That time, she said the boy needed salt and smoke. She'd been right. Now you watched her again, wondering what she was seeing this time. Because for the Maya, healing didn't begin with the body. It began with the dream. Not just the dreams of the sick, but the healer's own. They believed illness came when balance was broken, when a spirit wandered where it shouldn't, when a god was ignored, or when a person crossed into a space they weren't invited. The body was only where the trouble showed up. The cause, that was elsewhere. The healer's breath grew slower still. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The fire flickered. The boy twitched again. And then she spoke, still with her eyes closed, as if reading something in the darkness behind her lids. He was in the river last moon, she said, alone. He picked a stone that wasn't meant for him. It was part of a carving half buried. He broke it loose. You frowned. You hadn't heard anything about that. She opened her eyes slowly, not looking at you, looking past you. He didn't mean harm, she added, but it belonged to something older than this village. Now it's whispering to him, keeping him in that fever. You felt your mouth go dry. How could she know? She turned back to the fire and pulled a dried husk from her pouch, a flower, folded tightly like a fist. She held it over the flame until it crackled, then crushed it into powder. It was red, wasn't it? She asked. You blinked, then nodded. You remembered the stone vaguely. It had been reddish-brown smooth, like it had been touched 1,000 times. The boy had shown it to you, laughing. Said he would keep it to trade. You'd forgotten. She mixed the powder with a drop of water and dipped a fingertip in. Then she reached forward and touched the boy's sternum, drawing a single line down the center of his chest, to show him the way back. She took a breath, this time deeper. Tonight, she said softly, I will sleep near him. If the spirit speaks again, I will bargain. You wanted to ask bargain with what? But the words didn't come. Instead, you watched as she laid her hand on the boy's arm, gently, barely a touch, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. His breath slowed, still shallow, but steadier now. His fingers relaxed. Outside, the wind shifted. A breeze blew through the doorway, stirring the smoke, carrying the scent of something sweet copal resin maybe, or the wild ginger that bloomed near the shrine. The healer looked at you. "Sleep if you can," she said. "I'll keep watch, but if you dream of water, don't go in." You nodded, unsure if she meant it literally, or if dreams now held more weight than waking. She leaned back against the wall, her eyes half closed. The bowl of venom sat nearby, now cold. The boy's skin glistened faintly with sweat, but his face no longer looked so tight, so clenched in pain. And you felt yourself exhale. For the first time in hours. Section 6. Blood and Beeswax. The night passed in layers. There were hours when nothing moved, not even the fire. Then moments when the boy would shiver, or sigh, or whisper a name no one in the hut recognized. And then silence again. You slept in pieces, half awake, half tangled in dreams that felt borrowed. A jungle path that led nowhere. A hand made of smoke. A river flowing upward into the sky. When you woke, it was to the soft sound of humming. The healer was already working. She had placed a flat stone beside the fire and was melting something over it, a small pot of beeswax, thick, golden, sticky as truth. The scent filled the air, sweet floral, just a hint of something earthy, like rain-soaked bark. She didn't look at you, but she spoke. "His spirit came close last night. I spoke to it. It didn't answer, but it stayed." You rose slowly. The hut felt warmer than before. Brighter, too, though the rain still whispered outside. She picked up a small obsidian blade, thin and black, sharp as moonlight. You froze. She met your gaze calm. "Just a thread," she said. "Not enough to hurt. Just enough to call the body back." You nodded. The boy was still sleeping. His breath shallow but steady, seemed less desperate now. She knelt beside him. Whispered something soft, a song perhaps. You couldn't understand the words, but they curled in the air like incense. Then she made a small cut just beneath his left wrist. A single drop of blood welled up. She caught it with a sliver of cotton, folded it gently, then dipped the blood-soaked thread into the melted beeswax. The wax hissed softly as it cooled and clung to the cotton. She shaped it into a little ball, no bigger than a seed. Then she placed it in the center of his chest. "Now he will smell his own life," she whispered. She began to hum again. This time the melody was longer, slower. It wasn't quite a tune, more like a wave, rising, falling, circling. Each line seemed to echo something older than music, like it had been passed down, not in writing, but in breath, from mouth to mouth, across generations. You listened, transfixed. The boy stirred, his head turned slightly to the side, and then he made a sound, not a word, just a breath that felt like surrender. She kept humming. She added a few drops of honey to the wax ball, then touched it with the tip of her finger, brought that finger to his lips. He didn't flinch, but his tongue moved, tasted, and then he sighed. A soft, long sound like someone letting go of something heavy. The healer smiled, just a little. "That is the sound we wait for," she said. You almost cried, not from joy, but from the quiet beauty of it all. The wax, the blood, the song. This was not science. This was something older, something more fragile, and more powerful. A belief that healing wasn't about fighting illness, but reminding the body why it wanted to stay alive. She stood and poured water over her hands. The wax melted away. The blade disappeared back into its cloth wrap. You asked her, "Will he wake today?" She paused. "If the dream fades," she said, "if he chooses to forget it." You didn't understand, but you didn't need to. Because in this world, forgetting was part of healing, and remembering too much could be dangerous. The beeswax sat melting on his chest. The blood cooled on the stone. The song lingered in the air, even after her voice had gone still. And outside, the rain began, again, but softer, like footsteps returning. Section 7. Hallucination or healing? It started with a smile. A crooked one, small and half-formed, tugging at the corner of the boy's mouth. You weren't sure you'd seen it at first. Maybe it was just a twitch, a trick of the firelight. But then came the whisper. Not a word, just a shape of sound like the hush of leaves falling into water, or the way a name sounds when it's only half remembered. You leaned closer. His eyelids trembled, not fully opening, just shifting like someone dreaming something too bright to look at. And then the laugh. Not loud, not mocking, soft, strange. It didn't sound like the boy. It didn't sound like any child you knew. It sounded amused, as if something inside him had just heard a joke from another world, a private joke, one not meant for you. The healer didn't move. She just watched. Her face gave nothing away, not fear, not relief, only focus. You shifted in place, uncomfortable. Is this good? You asked, your voice barely above a breath. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pouch and drew out a single, thin cord. Woven bark, dried flowers knotted into it, faded now, but still holding scent. She wrapped it slowly around her wrist. Only then did she speak. If he returns now, he may not return as the same boy, she said. You frowned. What do you mean? He's seen things, she replied. Walked through a place most people never touch until the very end. It's beautiful sometimes, but it leaves fingerprints. You thought about that. The boy had only been feverish for 2 days, just 2, and yet something about him already felt older, like the fever had burned through his body and found something hidden deeper inside. Outside, the jungle held its breath. Even the toads had gone quiet. There was no sound except for the soft crackle of fire and the rhythm of his breath. Then, suddenly, he sat up. No warning, no struggle. He just rose as if pulled upward by something invisible. His eyes were still closed, but he turned his head slowly, deliberately toward the bowl of wax, then toward the healer, and then he spoke. She said not to drink from the blue cup. The words sent a chill down your spine. You stared. That voice, it was his, but wrong. Too measured, too steady. Not like a sick child, more like a messenger. The healer stood slowly, hands at her sides. What else did she say? She asked. He paused, then tilted his head slightly. She said the song was too short. She wanted more verses. That's why the door stayed closed. You didn't understand any of it. You didn't want to. He turned, not toward the healer, but towards you. And even though his eyes were shut, you felt like he saw you. You shouldn't have let the fire go out, he said. You froze. I didn't. You started, then stopped. The healer knelt beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder gently. He's not speaking to you, she said. He's speaking through you. You didn't reply. You couldn't. Then, as quickly as he'd risen, the boy collapsed back onto the mat. His limbs folded loosely beneath the blanket. His breathing returned to normal, shallow, steady. The healer exhaled softly. She reached for the bowl of honey and added a few crushed seeds. The mixture was dark now, nearly black. She dipped her finger and drew a line across his forehead, left to right, like sealing a door. Let the vision pass, she whispered. You stared at the boy's face. He looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. But you knew better. You'd heard his voice, and someone else's voice behind it. Was it hallucination, you asked finally? The healer wiped her hands and sat beside the fire. What you call hallucination, she said softly, we call remembrance. He saw something real. just not something meant for daylight. You looked at the boy, trying to see the child you knew. But something was different. Not broken, just shifted. Like part of him had traveled far away and was still deciding whether to stay. You gave him venom, you said. It made him see these things. She nodded. That's the purpose, to guide him where words cannot, to make the invisible speak. You wanted to ask, what if it speaks too loudly? What if it doesn't let go? But you didn't, because you already felt the answer hanging in the air. The fire crackled again. The beeswax ball still rested near his heart. The scent of copal drifted in from the entrance, carried on a breeze that hadn't existed a moment ago. The healer laid her head back against the wall. He will sleep for hours, she said, and when he wakes, we'll know whether he stayed. You nodded, then curled beside the wall, your own eyes closing. And somewhere between waking and dream, you heard her begin to hum again. Not a song, not really. Just a sound that felt like home. A sound you'd heard before, not in this life, but maybe the last. Section 8. The Spirit of the Tree. Night came again, but it came gently. No thunder, no sudden sheets of rain, just a gray hush folding over the jungle like a soft cloth drawn across a tired face. The fire was low now, its embers glowing like tired eyes. The boy slept, deeper this time. His brow no longer furrowed, his hands no longer curled into fists. And yet, the healer did not rest. She stood just outside the hut, barefoot in the mud, face turned upward. You joined her there, curious, but not wanting to break the silence. The moon had risen, not full, but bright enough to cast the faintest silver on the leaves. She pointed, wordless, toward the tall trunk of a nearby tree. Its bark shimmered, where the moonlight touched it smooth, in some places cracked in others. Long roots spread out like fingers across the wet earth. A tree you'd passed 100 times, never thought much about. But tonight, under her gaze, it seemed alive in a different way. Not just growing, not just breathing, but watching. It only gives sap once a month, she said softly, her voice like a wind between reeds. When the moon reaches that place. She gestured again to a point in the sky where a single star sat bright and alone. The tree knows, and if you ask it with clean hands, it might offer something back. She knelt by the base of the trunk, pulling a small obsidian knife from her belt. Not to cut deeply, just a gentle scratch, no more than a fingernail might leave. She placed her left hand on the bark, whispered a word, then waited. And there, just there, a drop began to form, thick, amber-colored. It glowed faintly in the moonlight. She caught it on a sliver of wood, then wrapped the stick in a cloth, folding it with reverence. "That's it?" you asked, barely above a whisper. She smiled faintly. "One drop is enough." Back in the hut, the boy stirred not in distress, but as if adjusting in a dream. His face remained calm. The healer unwrapped the cloth and held the stick over the fire, letting the sap warm gently. The scent rose like memory, not floral, not sharp, something deeper, like the smell of old prayer stones or the inside of a drum, earthy, resinous, and strangely familiar. You felt it in your chest before you smelled it, a kind of ache, a kind of pull. She dipped a fingertip into the softening sap and placed it behind the boy's ears along the ridge of his jaw. Then, in a voice so low you almost didn't hear it, she began to chant. Not a song, a pattern. 3 words pause, 3 words again, each line drifting like smoke that knew where it was going. The boy breathed in deeply, once, twice. And then his eyes fluttered open. Just for a moment. He didn't look at you. He didn't speak. But he looked up, toward the ceiling of the hut, toward the sky he couldn't see. And he smiled. Not the fever smile from before, not the haunted grin of something borrowed. A small, quiet smile, the kind a child makes when he hears a familiar voice after a long journey. Then his eyes closed again, and he slept. The healer did not move. You barely breathed. What was that? You asked finally. She didn't look at you. That was the spirit of the tree, she said. Not just its sap, but what the sap remembers. Everything it's seen, everything it's sung to. You stared at the flickering light, at the boy, at the tree beyond the doorway. And for the first time, you wondered how much the forest knew, how much it kept inside, how much it gave back only to those who asked without fear. The healer sat down beside the fire. She pulled out another cloth and wrapped the remaining sap carefully, like a relic. I'll use it again at sunrise, she said. One more touch, then the rest is his choice. You nodded, and for a long while, neither of you spoke. The only sound was the pop of the fire and the steady, sleeping breath of a child who had walked to the edge and taken one step back. Section 9. Copal, Smoke, and Prayers. At first, you thought the hut was on fire. The smoke was everywhere, coiling along the floor like mist pooling at the edges of the mat, rising in graceful, transparent ribbons toward the ceiling. It wasn't the angry smoke of a burning roof or a cook fire gone wild. It was slower, intentional. It had purpose. You watched the healer crouch near a clay censer, a squat three-legged vessel, painted with faded glyphs. Inside, orange embers pulsed, and nestled on top were globs of pale resin now melting into hissing pools. Copal. The scent reached you before anything else. Not sharp, not choking, but thick, sweet, and ancient. It filled your nose, your throat, your memory. You'd smelled it before at weddings, at funerals, at the naming ceremony of your cousin's first child. It was the scent of passage, of transition, of the space between things. Now it was rising over the body of the sleeping boy, clinging to his hair, his skin, the strip of wax still softening over his chest. The healer held a bundle of dried herbs, rosemary, lemongrass, something else you didn't know bound together at the stem. She dipped its tip into the smoke, then slowly waved it over his face. The leaves crackled faintly. The boy didn't flinch. She began to hum. No melody, no rhythm, just a line of breath with a shape inside it. She stepped sideways, letting the smoke drift. Then again, circling him slowly. You saw how she moved, not like a priest, not like a doctor, like a weaver, threading the smoke through the air, knotting it around the boy's limbs, tugging gently at something you couldn't see. Each pass was deliberate. Every swirl seemed to leave a message in the air. You felt your own breath grow slower, matching the rise and fall of the censer's plume. Then, softly, the healer began to speak. Not in conversation, not to you, not even to him, really. To the smoke, to the spirit. Remember your name, she said. Her voice was low and steady. Remember the sound of water when it touches stone. Remember the touch of your mother's hand on your back. Remember the sky before you learn to speak. The smoke carried her words. It wrapped around the boy's body like a blanket. It curled into his ears. It pooled at his feet. Remember the way your heart beat the first time it heard the drum. Remember the sun on your cheeks when you were too small to know what light was. Remember this body, the weight of it, the warmth of it. The fire popped, and a fresh rush of resin sizzled. The scent grew deeper, more earthy now, like tree bark, like hot stone, like memory. The boy twitched, just slightly. His mouth moved, no words. But he made a sound, a half-breath, as if startled by something beautiful he hadn't expected to see. The healer stepped back and opened the flap of the hut. Outside, the jungle was quiet, as if even the trees were listening. Rain tapped softly on the leaves, too polite to interrupt, and the smoke began to escape. It didn't rush. It wandered. A single ribbon of it moved like a dancer through the doorway, vanished into the dark. The healer turned to you. You have to let it go, she said. The prayers don't work if there's nowhere for them to travel. You nodded, still silent, still watching. She sat beside the censer and reached for a small carved shell. Lifting it to her lips, she blew once. A high, reedy sound, clear and short. Not music, a signal. Somewhere in the trees an owl answered. And then silence again. You looked at the boy. He was sleeping, but not as before. Not fever-ridden or tight with fear. Peaceful. His chest rose and fell in even rhythm. His jaw was slack, his hands open. The healer added another piece of copal to the censer, this one darker. It hissed and bubbled, releasing a thicker plume. Sometimes the smoke has to be heavier, she said, for the spirit that's stubborn. You almost smiled. He's stubborn, you said. She nodded. Then we'll need one more prayer. She reached into her bag and pulled out a strip of cloth, woven with tiny shells, each one painted red. She placed it gently across the boy's forehead. Then, for the last time that night, she whispered, "Come home to your breath. Come home to your name. Come home to the body that still waits." And then she blew out the censer. Smoke curled once, twice, then faded. And in that quiet, you swore just for a moment you heard the boy sigh in relief. Section 10. The Hollow Hut. You hadn't realized how small the hut was until now. In daylight, it felt larger. With the door open, with the mat rolled up, with baskets pushed to corners, the space seemed enough. Enough to cook in, enough to rest, enough to live. But now, as night fell again, and the fire shrank low, the walls seemed closer. The roof lower, the corners deeper. The boy lay in the center, not moving, not speaking. His breath was steady, his face no longer clenched. But the air felt thick, as if the smoke hadn't left, as if the prayers, the fever, the spirit still lingered, soaked into the walls, tangled in the ceiling beams. You sat along the edge of the room, knees to chest, watching him. The healer had stepped outside to collect leaves, she said, or maybe just to breathe. You were alone now, alone with the soft crackle of dying embers, alone with the scent of copal clinging to your hair, your clothes, alone with the sound of him breathing. That too had changed. It was no longer the ragged gasps of fever. It was smooth, rhythmic, but shallow. Like someone floating just beneath the surface of water. You looked around the hut. The walls were made of wattle and daub sticks and earth. You could see the impressions of hands in some spots, the fingerprints of those who built it, some still alive, some long returned to the soil. A bowl rested beside the doorway. In it, water, a few leaves of flower you didn't recognize. Offering or medicine, you weren't sure anymore. The lines between them had blurred. The mat beneath the boy was worn, frayed at the edges, stained dark, in places not from blood, but from time. There was something about the way it held his shape, as if it remembered the weight of sickness, as if it had cradled many fevers before. You thought of all who had laid here, children, elders, some who returned, some who didn't. The hut had no windows, just one doorway, one path for air to move through. It wasn't designed for beauty. It wasn't meant for comfort. It was built to hold something heavier. Grief, hope, waiting. You noticed the ceiling, then palm leaves, layered thick bound with vines. In one spot, a small hole let in the faintest beam of moonlight. Dust danced in it, slow and silent. You stared at that beam for a long time. It was the only light that didn't flicker, didn't move, just hung there, like a single thread tying this world to whatever lay beyond. And still the boy slept, but his fingers had curled slightly. His lips twitched once, a smile, a reflex. You leaned forward, careful not to disturb anything. There was something deeply sacred about this room now, not because of the fire or the healer or even the prayers, because this was the place where a decision was happening. Not yours, not hers. His. Would he stay? Would he return fully? Would the smoke be enough? Would the dreams? You didn't know. You only knew that the hut, this small, quiet, hollow hut, had become the center of everything, of medicine, of mystery, of memory. The healer returned a moment later, quiet as ever. She knelt beside the boy again, touched his arm, listened. Then she looked at you. "Still here," she said softly. You nodded. So did she. And without another word, she sat beside the wall, closed her eyes, and waited. And so did you. And so did the boy. And so did the hut. Together, breathing. Section 11. Medicine by Moonlight. The moon had risen higher now. Not full, but near enough. Its pale light filtered through the open doorway and the small hole in the roof, casting two soft circles on the floor like silent witnesses. The boy still slept. The healer moved with slow precision, as if trying not to disturb even the dust. She laid out her tools gently, a flat stone slab, a folded cloth, 3 small bowls carved from gourd. She placed each one at an angle, almost like a compass, then stepped outside without a word. You followed. The jungle was silver under the moon. Leaves sparkled with dew. Everything seemed sharper, quieter, like the night itself was holding its breath. She led you down a narrow path just past the ceiba tree. You knew this trail, but tonight it felt different, like something sacred had settled over it, or like something old had woken up. She stopped at a squat little plant, round leaves dark green, barely the height of your knees. She knelt. "This is ikchiche," she whispered. "It won't open unless the moon touches it." You watched as her fingers brushed gently over the leaves, and then, incredibly, they began to curl back, revealing a cluster of milky white blossoms, still trembling with moisture. She didn't cut them. She held her hands out, waited. A single drop of sap emerged at the center of the lowest flower, thick, almost clear. She caught it on a sliver of bark, held it to the moonlight. It shimmered faintly, not gold, not silver. Something in between. She nodded once. "One is enough." You walked back in silence. Back inside the hut, she lit no fire. The light of the moon was enough. She placed the bark gently on the stone slab, then opened a pouch and added a pinch of crushed root, a shaving of dried mushroom cap, and a single strand of thread soaked in honey. With a curved obsidian blade, she ground the mixture together. It made no sound, only a hush of pressure, the whisper of movement. You saw how her hands moved, not random, not rushed, but circular, always clockwise, always 3 times around before changing direction. She added a few drops of water from a calabash gourd, then stirred it again with a reed. The mixture was thin, now cloudy and brownish. She dipped a small woven brush into the liquid, turned to the boy, brushed the underside of his wrists, then the center of his feet, then finally a delicate circle just above his navel. Each stroke was slow, deliberate, like drawing a map. "He's wandering still," she said, "but not lost. This will help him remember the path." You nodded, though you barely understood. But something in the way the air shifted told you this wasn't just a potion. It was memory made liquid, held together by plant and moonlight and belief. She set the bowl aside, took a clean cloth, wrapped the bark sliver inside it, and placed it beneath the boy's mat, to keep the door open, but only a crack. Then she finally sat, back against the wall, hands in her lap. You sat too, both of you silent. And the moonlight filled the room, soft, gentle, enough to see, but not to judge. You looked at the boy. His breathing was deeper now, slower. He no longer looked like he was running from something. He looked like he was waiting to be called back. The healer didn't speak again. She simply watched the ceiling, the moonlight, the slow rhythm of recovery. And you began to feel it too, that this was not a fight, not a battle between medicine and illness, but a song sung softly enough that the spirit might choose to return. And under that pale ancient light you waited. Together. Section 12. Whispers of the Jaguar. They say not all fevers come from within. Some are given, not by spirits of wind or water, not even by the gods, but by the shadows that walk between. The healer told you this softly once long ago, that in every village there were stories of the black jaguar, not the animal, not the real one, whose tracks you might find near the river, but the other kind, the kind that lived just past the firelight, the kind that whispered at the edge of sleep. They said he came not to hunt flesh, but to reclaim memory, to stalk those who had forgotten an oath, a ritual, a name. And when he marked someone, they didn't bleed. They burned. In your village it was said that when the fever rises too fast without cause, without warning, you must listen for the growl, not with your ears but your bones. Tonight you do. You sit by the boy's mat listening. His breathing is slower now, yes, but deep within those sighs, there's something else, a rhythm that doesn't belong to him, like a second breath folded into the first, a stranger hiding inside a dream. The healer senses it too. She hasn't slept. Her eyes haven't left him for hours. She begins to chant, but not like before, not to draw him back, not to guide. This chant is different. Protective. A wall, not a hand. You recognize the words now. Not their meaning, but their weight. They're the words spoken at funerals, at fire pits, at the birth of twins. Words meant to keep the boundary in place. The healer draws a circle around the mat with ash, then again with powdered shell. She breaks a stick of copal and throws it into the flame. The smoke rises sharply this time, biting bitter. And then the boy growls. Not like an animal, not like a child, but somewhere in between. Low, guttural, wrong. Your body goes still. The healer doesn't flinch. She presses a hand to the boy's chest. He arches, then stills. His lips move. He speaks a name. Not his own, not yours. One you've never heard, but which sends cold along your spine all the same. The healer nods like she expected this. He was seen, she says. Something wants him. You don't ask what. Because the jaguar doesn't always need form. Sometimes it is just presence, a pressure in the chest, a sudden stillness in the trees, a scent like smoke and wet fur where there is no animal. Sometimes it speaks through fever. She pulls a bundle from her pouch, jaguar hair, braided with red thread, wrapped around a black stone. She places it near the boy's feet. If he's being tested, she says he must be reminded who he is. She begins another chant, slower this time. Each line is followed by silence, a waiting, a listening. The boy's body tenses, then releases. He says the name again, this time softer, then nothing. He exhales a long, shaking breath and rolls slightly onto his side, like a child settling into deeper sleep. The healer touches his forehead. It's past, she says, for now. You look at her. What was it? She doesn't answer right away. She looks at the fire. Then some illnesses are anger, some are forgetfulness, some are the debt of someone else's silence. She doesn't explain further. She doesn't need to, because deep down you understand. Not every sickness is yours, but you still have to carry it, still have to sweat it out, still have to face whatever waits in the shadows when your body can't fight anymore. The boy sleeps, but the room is colder now, quieter, as if something had left. Or paused. You wrap your shawl tighter, stare into the flame, wonder what name the boy said, and whether it still lingers in the corners of the hut. But the healer is calm now. She sits back. The jaguar walks on, she murmurs, for tonight. And outside in the trees, you hear a sound, a soft crack, a heavy step, but only once. Then only rain. Section 13. The Sting of Healing. At first light, the jungle shimmered. Not from heat, the rains had cooled the ground, but from that strange silver brightness that comes only after a long, unbroken storm. Everything dripped. Leaves, roofs, skin. Even your breath seemed heavier, saturated with the scent of moss and damp stone. Inside the hut, the fire had gone out and the smoke had thinned to a faint line curling toward the roof hole. The boy slept still, but something had shifted. Not in his face, not in his breath. In the air. There was a tension now, not danger, not fear. Anticipation. The healer was awake before you. She had prepared something. You could see it in the little woven tray at her side. Tiny clay pots, a leaf bundle, and a small covered gourd that pulsed faintly as if alive. You sat up slowly. She looked at you but said nothing yet. She unwrapped the leaf bundle. Inside, ants. Large, dark, and moving slowly. Their bodies shimmered like wet obsidian. You drew back slightly. She didn't scold. She simply explained. They sting, not to harm, but to wake. You nodded, though you didn't understand fully. She pulled a strip of bark and laid it across her lap. These are che ants, sacred. Their sting brings heat back to the skin, opens the places that fever closes. You looked at the boy. His legs hadn't moved in days. His hands twitched sometimes, but never fully opened. The healer gently lifted his arm, held it above the mat, then placed a single ant against the inside of his wrist. It didn't bite immediately. It waited as if listening. Then, without warning, sting. The boy flinched. A sharp, quick jerk. Not violent, but sudden. She removed the ant. A tiny welt formed. Then again, another ant. Another sting, this time on the foot. He pulled it back. You watched, wide-eyed. He's coming back, she said. This tells the body it still wanted. You looked at his face. His lips moved. No sound, but a furrow appeared in his brow, the first in days. You realized something. This was pain. Not sickness, not delirium. Just pain, ordinary, grounding, human. It meant he was in there, feeling again. She repeated the process twice more. Always just one sting, always with care. Then she took a paste from one of the small pots, crushed leaves, and cooled ash, and rubbed it gently over each welt. To calm the fire, she said. The boy sighed, long, low. The kind of sound that felt like stepping out of a long, bad dream. His hand moved. Not twitching, not spasming. He reached, not for anything, just outward. The healer placed her palm beneath it. He rested there, lightly, like a bird choosing a branch. He knows where he is now, she whispered. You felt your shoulders relax for the first time in days. You looked again at the tray. Just ants, just leaves, just ash and bark. But somehow it was enough. Not magic, not miracle. Just the right kind of pain in the right place at the right time. You watched the boy's fingers flex once, twice. His toes shifted. Small movements, but meaningful, like someone warming themselves by a slow rising fire. You whispered, not sure if to him or to the healer, he's returning. She nodded, tired now, but satisfied. The sting, she said, reminds the soul it has skin. You didn't fully understand, but in that quiet, humid morning light, as the jungle woke again outside, you knew this. The worst was no longer inside him. Now he only had to choose to stay. Section 14. A river of sweat, full expanded version. It didn't happen all at once. There was no gasp, no cry of pain, no divine sign scratched into the walls. No drumbeat from the hills, no omen in the sky. The boy didn't sit up and announce his return. He didn't open his eyes and say he was better. He simply began to sweat. It started with a glisten, a faint shine along his collarbone, tiny drops beading along his hairline, a shimmer at the curve of his cheek that caught the firelight like dew on stone. At first, you thought it was the heat of the hut, but the fire had long since died down, and the air had cooled with the dawn. Then you thought maybe he had been crying, but his face was soft, not strained. No, this was not sorrow. This was release. You leaned closer. His skin glowed now, not fever bright, but moist, damp in the way the earth is damp after giving up a secret. There was a scent to it, faint, salt, sweet, earthy, the smell of a body rejoining itself. The healer saw it too. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She simply nodded as if recognizing a familiar shape in the mist. She moved slowly across the room and returned with a wide, hollowed gourd, placed it beside the boy's hip, angled, just beneath the edge of the mat, and waited, because sweat in Maya medicine is not just waste, it is testimony. Proof that the heat has broken, that the illness is no longer clinging to the bones, that the soul, once curled tightly against itself, has begun to unfold. The sweat deepened. No longer beads, now rivulets. It gathered at the base of his neck and slid toward his shoulders. It dampened the blanket. It soaked into the mat. And beneath the mat, the earth drank. You could hear it almost, the quiet whisper of salt water returning to soil. The healer whispered too, but not to you. To him, to the boy, to the sweat. Let go, she murmured. Let go of the heat. Let go of the name the fever gave you. Return to the one your mother gave. His chest rose, fell, rose again, not fast, but with purpose. You watched as sweat rolled across his temple, along his jaw, into the hollow of his throat. The healer caught some on her fingers, held it to her nose, then rubbed it onto the walls of the hut, one circle above the door, one on each side beam. To mark his passage, she explained, to remind the house that he left and returned. You didn't question it. Nothing seemed strange anymore, even as the floor beneath him darkened, even as the mat sagged beneath the weight of moisture. You felt no urgency to wipe it away. Because it wasn't just sweat. It was memory leaving. It was pain turned liquid. It was the body learning how to speak again, not in cries, not in fever, but in droplets. The boy moaned softly. His eyes did not open. But his toes curled. His fingers twitched. His head tilted slightly toward you. You moved closer. Took his hand in yours. It was slick but warm, alive. The healer placed a second bowl beneath his feet. This will carry the last of it, she said, and you knew what she meant. The last of the darkness, the last of the forgetting. The sweat streamed now, not in torrents, but in certainty. The hut grew humid. The air thickened. But no one opened the door. This part needed to be held close. A ritual, a river inside the room. When the sweating began to slow, not stop, just slow, the healer reached for a bundle of clean cotton. She dabbed at his chest, his brow, behind his knees. Not to erase the evidence, but to comfort, to care. Then she folded the cloth and placed it in the fire pit. Burned it. Smoke curled upward. The last breath of the fever, she said. And you believed her. The boy sighed, deep, long, his mouth parted just slightly. You heard a sound, not a word, not even a name. Just breath. But it sounded like yes. You turned to the healer. She smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly, but with relief so old it looked like gratitude. He chose, she said, and then finally, after nights of whispers of chants of venom and dreams and ash, you let yourself believe. He would live. Section 15. Honey for the heart, the fever was gone. Not chased, not defeated, but quietly released. It had loosened its grip some time before dawn, and now the boy slept not with the tight, clenched stillness of sickness, but with the soft, open calm of someone who has wandered and come home. His breaths were slow, easy, deep, and the hut, this small, earth-walled room that had once held so much heat, so much shadow, now felt cool, soft, a little empty, like it was exhaling too. You sat beside him, your fingers still wrapped gently around his wrist, and for the first time you noticed how light he felt, not weightless, but free of tension. He was no longer fighting. Now he was resting. The healer moved with careful purpose, not tired exactly though her body surely was, but quiet, like a weaver tying the final knot on a cloth that had taken nights to make. From her basket, she brought a small jar. It was dark, clay smooth, and round, sealed with beeswax and bark string. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently. Inside, honey. Not store honey, not the clear golden kind that comes in neat little pots. This honey was thick, dark amber, fragrant with flowers you could not name. And old, not spoiled, but aged, like it had been resting in shadow, waiting for this moment. She dipped a carved spoon inside, lifted it, let it fall. It moved slowly, heavy with sweetness, alive with memory. You looked at her question forming in your eyes. She answered before you could ask. He needs to remember why to stay, she said softly. Sometimes the body heals, but the heart forgets. She scooped a small spoonful, no more than a breath, and held it to the boy's lips. He stirred. Not with surprise, not with fear. He turned toward it like a flower toward the sun. His lips parted. The honey touched his tongue. And he sighed, a sound you had never heard from him before. Not pain, not relief, not even joy. Something gentler. Softer, like recognition. He swallowed, and for a moment nothing moved. Then his eyelids fluttered, opened. His gaze drifted not toward you, not toward the healer, not even toward the light, but upward. As if remembering something beautiful, something he couldn't explain. His mouth moved. No words, just a sound like the start of one. The healer leaned close. She placed a hand on his chest, felt the warmth, nodded. His heart knows, she whispered. She dipped the spoon again. This time, she placed a drop on his wrist, then his forehead. To sweeten the path forward, she murmured. And then a final drop on the center of the mat, to mark the spot where he chose life. You felt your throat tighten, because you realized something you hadn't before. The honey wasn't just for him. It was for you, for the healer, for the hut, for the night itself. A way to say, you were all here. You carried him. Now let sweetness remain. The boy blinked again. His eyes found yours, and for the first time in days he smiled. Small, crooked, perfect. You smiled back. The healer placed the jar aside, wrapped it once more in its cloth, tied it closed. She would save the rest. For the next soul who might forget. For the next heart that needed to remember why it loved the world. You leaned your head back against the wall. Outside, birds began to call, and in the cool, golden light of morning, you listened to the slow, steady heartbeat of someone who had walked the edge of silence and returned. Section 16. Touching the Dead. He was alive. You could see it. In the way his fingers flexed around yours. In the way his mouth formed half words between shallow breaths. In the light that had returned to his eyes. Not bright, not sharp, but steady, like an ember that had chosen not to go out. And yet, the healer was quiet, not relieved, not smiling. She had moved to the far end of the hut and begun preparing something else. Not food, not water, not herbs. She was preparing to speak with the dead. You didn't ask why. Somewhere deep in your body, in the marrow of your bones, in the breath between thoughts, you understood. The living could celebrate, but the dead still had to be consulted. Not because they were owed, but because they had watched. They had stood at the threshold with the boy, perhaps even held his hand, perhaps even offered to keep him. And now that he had turned back, someone had to make sure they agreed. The healer unwrapped a bundle of bone and thread. Inside was a shard of mirror obsidian perfectly polished, no larger than your palm. She lit no fire. She didn't need to. The light of mid-morning slid through the doorway and landed almost obediently on the surface of the black stone. She sat cross-legged before it, placed 3 cacao beans beside it, then a pinch of ash, then a strip of cloth from the boy's sleeve. She breathed out once, deeply, then touched the mirror. You could feel the shift in the air. The hut, once warm and full of breath, suddenly felt paused, as if something had leaned in from outside the world. The healer spoke. I asked not for names, not for secrets. Only this: was the boy taken or returned? Her voice didn't echo, but it seemed to hang longer than sound should. You glanced at the boy. He was watching her, quiet, calm. His lips moved again. One word. You didn't catch it. The healer pressed her fingers into the ash and rubbed them across her temples. Then she waited. So did you, for what you didn't know. A sound, a sign. And then the mirror fogged. Not from heat, not from breath, but from presence. A single bead of moisture appeared on its surface. The healer nodded. They have answered, she said softly. No debt, no claim. He was simply allowed. You exhaled. Not loudly, just enough to let go. The healer stood and turned to the boy. She placed the mirror on the ground beside him. Touch it, she said gently. He reached out slowly, as if underwater, and laid his fingers on the glass. His eyes closed. His breath slowed. When he pulled his hand back, a print remained tiny dark, evaporating even as you looked. She picked up the obsidian and wrapped it again. It would be used another time, for someone else, for another moment like this. You sat beside the boy, brushing a curl from his forehead. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was here, fully. The healer sat beside the door, watching the light shift across the floor. Sometimes, she said, the dead say yes. Sometimes they don't answer. That's when we light candles. You nodded. And if they say no? She didn't look at you. She only said, then we don't ask twice. But today, they had said yes. So you stayed in that small, hollow hut, listening to the wind outside, holding the hand of a boy who had been gone and was now returned, while the mirror cooled in the corner and the dead watched from a distance, satisfied. Section 17. Between the Worlds. No one slept that night, not because of fear, not even because of vigilance, but because some nights are not meant for sleep. They are meant for waiting, for watching, for witnessing. The healer didn't say it out loud, but you could feel it in the way she tended the small fire with quieter hands than usual, in the way she set out 3 drinking bowls instead of 2, in the way she sat closer to the boy, though not touching him. He was better, that was clear. His breath was even. His skin was warm, no longer hot. His eyes stayed open longer now, though he spoke little. Just looked around the room as if still learning what it meant to be back. He blinked often, like light was new. He reached for water but sipped slowly, like it was something he had once known but had forgotten how to hold. You held his hand sometimes, then let it go. Then took it again. Each time he accepted it with the soft pressure of fingers curling. You stayed close, because even if his body had returned, his spirit still lingered somewhere in between. The healer called it the crossing night, the night after a soul chooses to live again. It was not dangerous, she said, but it was delicate. Like a bridge made of smoke, she murmured. If you speak too loudly, it trembles. If you sleep too deeply, it forgets the way back. So no one slept. Not you, not her, not the few villagers who came quietly after sunset to check the doorway to leave small bowls of maize drink to press fingers gently to the boy's brow. They didn't speak. They didn't stay long. Just enough to remind him, you are not alone. The boy lay on his mad eyes, half-lidded, watching the flicker of the flame. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he turned his head and stared at the corner where the mirror had been. Once he whispered something, a name or maybe a bird, and all the while the fire burned. Not high, not bright, just enough. The healer added cinnamon bark and dried orange peel to the coals. The scent rose slowly. It was sweet, calming, but also sharp enough to keep you awake. She placed a carved stone beside the door. To remind the wind not to pass through tonight, she said. Let it wait until morning. And the wind obeyed. The air in the hut stayed still. No drafts, no creaks in the thatch, no rustling, just breath. Yours, his, hers. 3 rhythms, weaving together like a rope made of sound. At one point, the boy sat up. No help, just slowly using his elbows. He looked around, then whispered, "Is it over?" The healer leaned in. "Not over," she said gently. "Just different now." He nodded, laid back down, smiled faintly. Then closed his eyes. Not in sleep, just to rest. The stars shifted overhead. The fire burned low, then steadied. And time, that strange, stretched thing, passed like a quiet boat across still water. You whispered stories to him, ones you remembered from childhood, ones you made up on the spot, ones where the heroes always found their way home. He didn't answer, but he listened. You could tell by the way his breath responded to each pause, the way his fingers twitched when you reached the end of a line. The healer sat nearby, head tilted back against the wall, eyes open but soft. And in the quietest hour of the night, that space between moonset and dawn, the boy said, "Don't go." You smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." And you didn't. No one did. Because that was what the between night needed. Not healing, not rituals, just presence. Just someone to sit in the half-light and remind a returning soul, "We see you. You're here. You don't have to go back." And in that silence, in that hush so complete, you could hear the fire settling that you knew. He was choosing again and again to stay. Section 18. The first breath after. At first it was nothing, just another breath. Like all the others before it, steady, soft, easy. You had been listening to them all night, counting them between flickers of flame, matching them to your own as the hours unraveled in quiet threads. But this one was different. This one came with weight. It pulled deeper, sounded fuller. Felt like it came not just from the lungs, but from someplace buried, a breath that had waited its turn at the edge of something final. You looked over at him. The boy was waking. Not just opening his eyes, waking. His fingers stretched outward. Not like a twitch, not like a spasm, but a reaching. His toes pressed softly against the mat. His shoulders lifted just slightly enough to make the blanket shift. And then he sighed. It wasn't a sound of pain, not confusion, not even relief. It was the sound of someone who had chosen. The healer noticed too. She didn't speak, She simply placed her hands on her knees, closed her eyes, and exhaled with him, like acknowledging a contract fulfilled. You moved to his side, kneeling gently. His eyelids fluttered once, then opened slowly like petals after a storm. And this time, when he looked at you, he knew you. There was no fever glaze, no distant stare, only recognition. Only home. You didn't speak right away. Neither did he. There was no need. His face was thinner, his skin still pale. But his eyes, those were steady now, quiet but anchored. You whispered, "Can you hear me?" He nodded. A small, almost imperceptible motion. You waited. Then he whispered, "I'm still here." You laughed, though it caught in your throat. "So are we." He turned his head slightly, looked around the hut. The thatched roof above, the healer in her corner, the burned bundle of herbs in the censer, the mat beneath him, the circle of ash still faintly visible on the floor. "I dreamed of light," he said. You leaned closer. "Was it warm?" He nodded, then paused. "And quiet, but not empty." You felt your eyes sting, but you didn't let tears fall. Not yet. Instead, you poured a small gourd of water, held it to his lips. He drank. Not too much, but enough. Enough to know he could. The healer rose, stepped to his side, touched his forehead, then his sternum, then the center of each palm. "He's inside himself again," she murmured. Then she smiled truly for the first time since it all began. And that smile, it was not joy. It was something softer, something deeper. Like gratitude and wonder braided together. You placed your hand on the boy's chest. Felt the rhythm, not fast, not weak, just there. The most ordinary miracle in the world. He reached for your wrist. Held it lightly. "Did you wait?" he asked. You laughed, a sound that filled the hut like sunlight creeping across the floor. "We never left." Outside, the light was changing. Not fully day, but enough to make the trees glow green again, enough to make shadows shrink back into roots. Birds called soft and slow, and the boy, this child, who had floated at the edge of breath for so long, took another. And another. And each one sounded more like living. Section 19. The healer walks away. She began packing before the sun reached the top of the trees. Not in haste, not with ceremony. Just slowly, without sound, the way one folds up a mat after sleep, the way one puts out a flame that has done its work. The boy had eaten a little by then. Warm broth from your mother's pot, a handful of soft cornmeal. He smiled when you helped him sit. His back was still weak, but his voice had returned thin but steady. The hut smelled of herbs and honey and something else, the clean, sharp scent of air after a long storm. The kind of air that says you made it through. The healer said nothing as she wrapped her cloth bundles. Her hands were quick-practiced. She packed her tools, obsidian blade bark scrolls, the jar of honey, now lighter. She wiped the bowl of sweat clean and buried the cloth used to catch it. She touched nothing twice. Only once did she pause, at the mirror. The obsidian shard, still wrapped in its red thread cloth. She sat beside it for a moment, placed her fingers gently on top, closed her eyes. Then she stood, and didn't touch it again. You wanted to say something, thank her, ask her to stay, give her food, give her your hand. But you didn't. Because something in her posture and the way she moved around the room told you she had already left. Not with her body, but with her role. The part of her that belonged here had already returned to the forest. The rest was just shadow, finishing a shape. She stepped to the doorway. The boy watched her. He said nothing either, only nodded. The healer looked at him. She didn't smile. But she placed her right hand to her chest, then touched the air between them. Not quite blessing, not quite goodbye, Then she turned. No words, no footsteps loud enough to hear, only the rustle of leaves moving to make space for her again. You stood in the doorway and watched her walk, down the narrow trail, past the ceiba, into the mist, into the silence. No one called after her, no one followed, because some people do not leave. They return to where they were always meant to be. You looked at the path long after her figure had disappeared. The jungle closed behind her. Softly, completely, as if she had never come, as if you had dreamed her. Inside the hut, the boy had fallen asleep again, peaceful now, heavy with healing. You sat beside him. The fire burned low. A bird called in the distance. The air was warm again, but light. You thought of the healer where she might go next. Another village, another mat, another child balancing on the edge, and someone else just like you sitting beside them, praying for breath. Maybe they would never know her name. Maybe they would never see her face again, but they would remember what she left behind. A heartbeat, a stillness, a way back. Section 20. Rain falls again. It began the way it always did. A single drop, then another, then the steady soft percussion of rain on thatch. But this time, it didn't bring fear. You heard it as you sat on the floor beside the boy, gently stroking his hair while he slept, his chest rising and falling like the rhythm of a quiet drum. His fever had not returned. His body was cool now, warm in the way that means alive, not burning. The rain came steady. No thunder, no wind, just the kind of rain that washes more than roofs. It slid down the walls of the hut, pat-patted against the clay bowls outside, gathered in the grooves where the healer had buried the sweat-soaked cloth. The jungle accepted it. The earth breathed it in. And you smiled. Because now you knew what it meant. Rain didn't always bring sickness. Sometimes it brought remembering. Sometimes it meant a second chance. You opened the door of the hut and stepped outside. The village was quiet. Most homes were still closed, the smell of fresh corn and wet firewood mixing into the morning air. A few neighbors moved gently along the paths, checking that the water didn't rise too quickly, nodding at one another with the kind of silence that said, "We heard what happened, and we're glad he's still here." You stood in the doorway, letting the rain touch your skin. It was cool, but not cold. It was gentle, but not weak. It felt like fingers brushing dust from your shoulders. Behind you, the boy stirred. Not in pain, just waking. He sat up, slowly rubbed his eyes, and looked towards you. "The rain," he said. You turned back. He wasn't afraid. You walked over, helped him stand. He leaned into you, still wobbly, still thin, but upright. Together, you stepped outside. He blinked into the light, lifted his face, let the rain touch his cheeks, his nose, his lips. He smiled. Not wide, not loud, but deep. The kind of smile that grows from somewhere behind the ribs. The kind that means I am here. Around you, the world moved slowly. Birds chirped from under leaves. Children's laughter rang faintly from a nearby home. The wind curled through the village, carrying no messages, just presence. And the healer, she was long gone, but she was in the air, in the trees, in the small white flower blooming beside the doorway, in the way the rain didn't flood, but cleansed. You looked up at the sky. Gray, soft, endless. And for the first time in days, you breathed not cautiously, not protectively, but fully. The boy did too. And in that shared breath, with rain falling gentle all around you, both understood something words could not hold. He had come back. You had waited. The dead had nodded. And now the rain could fall again. So now you're still here. The rain is falling again. But this time, you don't need to run. You can let it drum lightly on your roof. Let it kiss your arms, your knees, the soles of your feet. Because you know something you didn't know before. That a fever can be more than an illness. That healing isn't always a fight. Sometimes it's a quiet waiting, a soft hand on your forehead, a bundle of herbs burning slowly in the dark. Sometimes it's a boy who stops breathing for a moment and then remembers how. Sometimes it's a healer who speaks with the dead, then walks away without asking for thanks. And sometimes healing isn't in the body at all. It's in the people who stay up all night beside you, who don't sleep just in case you forget how to stay, who whisper your name back to you when your soul drifts too far. So tonight, maybe let your body rest. Let the sweat leave you. Let the prayers settle in your chest. Let the honey sweeten your heart. And if you hear the rain on the roof as you drift off, know that it isn't a warning anymore. It's a blessing. You made it through the storm. Sleep well now. You're still here.